Hello everyone, this is Elias Martin from CollectingJapanesePrints.com. Welcome to Woodblock Wednesday, where on Wednesdays we get together and discuss Japanese prints, paintings, history, and culture. Today's Woodblock Wednesday features Kawase Hasui, who's a monumental figure of Shin Hanga prints. He got his start working with the publisher Watanabe, and Watanabe went on to publish, I would say, about 90 to 95% of Hasui's output. But today's conversation is slightly different. I always like to show things that are rarely seen out in the world, and I think today is one of those days where we can truly admire a important print by Hasui, but then see some comparisons to other things, which will give us greater insight onto the design and Hasui's work. So without further ado, let's go to the table and have a look. So let me pan out and you can see what we'll be discussing today. I have some references as usual, but the design we'll be discussing is Hasui's Zojoji temple from 1925. And this is a series, this print belongs to a series of designs that featured compositions that were inspired within the city of Tokyo. And so this design features a Zojoji temple that is in Tokyo. And it is not the first time Hasui focused on this design. He actually produced a pre-earthquake design in 1922. I actually happen to have an image of that on my website on my current exhibition of summer acquisitions. I encourage all of you to go to the website and have a look at the exhibition. There's some fantastic prints, including works by Hasui. And the pre-earthquake has sold, but there's still a very good image of it. But for our conversation today, I actually have three impressions of this design. And this is something I think most collectors aren't aware of, or maybe they might be, but they haven't really seen this comparison before. So we will start with the first state. And when I say state, I mean it's the very earliest printing of this design. Most collectors just go by the Watanabe seal, and that is a A-type seal, which is the very first seal Watanabe used on his prints. And it does indicate an early printing. However, that is not the sole indicator for a first state impression. In fact, let me just backtrack a little bit. A state refers to the first sort of printing and a first version of, or a state refers to a version. First state meaning it's the very earliest first version of the print. And in this case, we have a series cartouche on the left-hand side. That's something you don't normally see on these prints because it's quite rare. It's only on the earliest printings. And when there is a change in the matrix of the woodblock, or there's a change within the basically the main portion of the block that produces the impression of the design, in any way, you have a different state. And so in this case, this was eliminated on later printings, and you will find early printings with an A-type seal that don't have this cartouche. And the cartouche really is the primary indicator of a first state impression of Zojoji Temple 1925. I would not rely on the seals. The seals, the Watanabe seals, they're helpful, but they're not really the way that you would date a print. Because, as I've been told by Watanabe, the current grandson of the original publisher, they actually stamp the seals often when they were sold and not when they were printed. So, and then sometimes they were stamped when they were printed. There's some inconsistencies in when the seal was applied. So you can't really determine that. You have to look at other clues. One would be, in this case, the cartouche on the left-hand side. That's a dead giveaway. The other thing you look at is the impression, how crisp it is. You know, are there breaks in the lines? How sharp just the overall impression is. Once you get a sense of that, then you can kind of determine how early the impression is. I'll give you an example of what I mean. This book is the well-known book, the Kawase Hasui catalog. I happen to have one for sale on my website, so if you're interested, certainly contact me. And this used to be the catalog raisonné for Hasui. It was certainly not complete, but it's still kind of nice because it's a coffee table size book that shows many prints life size, or if not a little bit larger. And in this case, we have a full page illustration of this design. And you will see there is the Watanabe A-type seal. However, we are missing the series cartouche. So, technically speaking, if you really want to get to the nitty-gritty and you're a series collector and you're looking for a truly first state, this would not be it. I would categorize this print as a very early printing, but not a first state. Now, looking at this work, what differences can we find between this impression and the one that is an A-type seal, but not a first state? Now, mind you, this has been printed in a book, and so we can't completely rely on those things. However, I want to point out there's some really beautiful bokashi on the roof, on this part of the rooftop, as well as here below the veranda. I'm going to zoom in so you could see. And there's kind of a bluish color that's been applied that creates a stronger atmospheric quality. Also, the rooftop here. And when you look at this print, which is, basically very early, but not first state, you're missing those little elements. Now, that just might mean that this particular impression doesn't have that embellishment, but when you're looking at something that's really early, these are the things you find on these prints. These wonderful sort of slight, subtle printing effects that really make the design pop. And of course, this design is so stunning already, but when you have those elements, it really gives the impression of force, of vitality, that it's hard to kind of convey via a video, but when you're looking at it in person, it almost seems three-dimensional, particularly this portion of the design, because of all of the subtle printing effects. And here, if you look at this impression, it's I'm sorry about the glare, but I'm going to try to angle this a little bit. You can see it kind of lacks that. If I can, okay, there we go. It lacks that quality. But for our conversation, we're going to dive deeper. And so I happen to have here another impression of this design by Hasui. And this has a later seal. I think this is a C or D type seal. I have to look that up, which particular letter is assigned to it. Now, this is still an early printing. It's still pre-war. It's still a fantastic design that any collector would want. But it's just a little less than this one, because this is the most desirable impression because of how early it is with the cartouche, the A-type seal, but the printing. Here you'll see that you do have that subtle bokashi of blue here, but it doesn't pop as much as here. And that just might mean, it's a different impression, of course, but it's also, when you see it very early printing, this is what you notice. The other thing that's interesting is that this design was so popular. Watanabe printed hundreds of impressions of this design. We know this because it comes up for sale quite a bit in the marketplace. Now, most of those impressions you see are in terrible condition because they've been framed and subject to just years of neglect in terms of how they were stored. And I never carry prints in that condition, and these are in exceptional condition. However, there's still printing differences between the two. The red here pops a little bit more. This one it's richer. This is darker. This is a little bit brighter, and that's not because there's fading on this print. It's just how it was printed, particularly during the period of time when it was done before the war. The other nuance that is might be missing if you haven't noticed it, is this blue. I think this is kind of a scarf she's wearing, and here it's purple. That is a known variation in this design. There's a blue version and there's a purple version. Some people have said incorrectly that the blue version is a faded version of the purple. Purple does not fade to this blue whatsoever. They're just printed with a different coloration, and that's just that. The other thing I want to point out is there's this delicate band around the top of the umbrella. That's not as visible here in this printing. And the reason for that is that the line, the band here is embossed. And it's part of the woodblock matrix that is much more delicate. It's not a deeper line, for example, that you find in the tree here or on the temple. So this wasn't carved all that deeply. And here, because of the wear of the block over time, the band sort of strength in the impression, has lessened a bit. So, that's just something to take note. The other thing I'll point out is that this very fine line on the tree, you see there's a small little break there. Here, the line is all there. And again, this is just something you see on the earliest printings. This printing is maybe 10 years after this. This was in 1925. This is about 1930-ish, 33, 35. And so imagine how many impressions Watanabe was able to get out of the blocks by then, and of course you're going to start seeing some wear. It was so popular, this design, that actually Watanabe produced another version to include as a calendar. So this is a woodblock print that was produced for his calendar from the 30s. And we know this partly because some of these survive with the calendar portion at the bottom, and the year of that is I think it's 33. 35. He reused it, but it's not post-war. In fact, Watanabe kind of stopped selling to the West during the war, and it didn't pick up until after the war, and his sales were not as strong as they were before the war, clearly. But nonetheless, I wanted to show this print because it is a wonderful. And it's not a reprinting. It is in fact another entirely new print of the same design, but on a smaller scale. So I want to show that the print is in fact about a third, the third of the size less than the Oban size print. It's bigger than an Ibon, but it's not an Oban size print, which I think is really fascinating. And the impression of this design is razor sharp. We have sharp lines. Here he added the band. I don't know if you could tell. from the video, but there is an embossed band around the umbrella. But basically, he had his artisans create a smaller version to include it in the calendar, and they did everything possible to this slightly smaller version than they did to the original version. And so, in some ways, there's some effects here that I like more than on the earlier versions. You know, the background is a little bit more robust. It's stronger, and it sort of helps to convey the three dimensionality of the composition and the snow, where these two designs are a little bit more flat, which is kind of interesting. That's just how he printed it, or his artisans printed it. It's much more dramatic, the background at least. But you know, at the end of the day, it's still the same design, and it's one of those things that collectors may not see. This is a very rare version of this design. And so I've seen it in 20 some years of doing this. I've seen this maybe a couple times. So it's extraordinarily rare. Now, I will also say that in the 20 some years I've been, in the business, I've only seen a handful of these really early impressions with the series cartouche. This is extraordinarily rare. And because this design is so sought after, they're all rare because collectors are always snatching them up. So I just wanted to show the differences between three impressions. Most likely you've seen an impression like this, or in earlier printing with an A-type seal. But chances are you may not have seen one with the series cartouche or a smaller version, or completely redone smaller version of the subject. So, I've said a lot. I want to zoom in on the prints themselves so you could see the printing. It's nice to see a snow scene, particularly in late July. It's extraordinarily hot here in Chicago with a lot of humidity. And so it's kind of nice to sort of take a break from the humidity and the heat and just admire something like this. Again, here is the Watanabe cartouche. And I keep saying this, but the quality of each of these prints, in terms of condition and impression and color, it's fantastic. So quite frankly, you can't go wrong with any of them. But as a collector, one should know the differences between the earliest impression, slightly later, and then a little bit later, about 10 years later, and then, another version what completely redone. And in terms of pricing, I should tell you, this first state printing is $25,000. And an early pre-war impression in exceptional condition is about $10,000 less. So this is about $15,000. And because of the rarity of this, though it's smaller, of course, but the rarity in condition and how beautiful the printing is, this is $12,000. So they're certainly not inexpensive. But for a collector, they're not unobtainable. You see, this print has sold at auction for crazy prices to people who are not collectors, who had more money than sense. And this design with this type of seal has sold at Christie's for $40,000-$50,000. Now, I'm a dealer that deals with collectors and the market, not those market anomalies. Now, of course, at auction, anything can happen, but I price my things based on the market and not by crazy prices at auction. And again, those people paying those prices aren't collectors. They don't understand the market. They just see something pretty. They have a lot of money, and they just go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna try to zoom in so you could see. I'm going to thank all of you for joining me. I'm seeing all these comments. Thank you. Yeah, it's this design is a fan favorite. I could see Kenneth. I could see why you got into Japanese prints because of this design. I mean, it is stunning. And as good as Hasui is or was, he owes a lot of his success to Watanabe. Not just because Watanabe started the movement, clearly he did that, but he also sort of encouraged Hasui to do some subtle changes to his artwork that made it more commercial. And for example, his pre-earthquake version of Zojoji Temple, and I encourage all of you to go to my website, collectingjapaneseprints.com, go to my summer acquisitions, and you will see a pre-earthquake version. And that version, the perspective is Western. It's much more accurate. And there's a Western figure, or at least a man dressed in Western clothes, walking through the temple complex. Now, it's a striking design. It's beautiful and quite rare. But it's funny, that's his pre-earthquake version of this composition, or of this subject. But after the earthquake, Watanabe had a lot more influence on Hasui, and he encouraged him to do different things. Clearly, he encouraged him to produce snow scenes, or designs with atmospheric qualities, because Hasui went on to produce, I would say he's most remembered for his snow scenes or rain designs, or at least designs with atmospheric elements. But in this case, the design is much flatter, and instead of having a Western dressed man, he has a woman dressed in a traditional kimono, with a paper umbrella and wooden getas. This is not a this is not a snow prepared person whatsoever. I mean, this is not what you would expect to wear in a snowstorm. Now, the Western figure in the pre-earthquake, he was quite well dressed for the elements. But in this case, Watanabe, I'm sure, encouraged Hasui to look back to its time that was much simpler, to the Edo period, the time, or Meiji, early Meiji Edo, where this is how women were clothed most of the time, or all the time, in kimonos like this, and they were walking through temple complexes. And in this case, that's what Hasui, produced. Something that was much more nostalgic, and something that certainly looked back and not forward. And so, but it's interesting to compare Hasui's pre-earthquake work versus the work he produced after the earthquake, because there is a change. And I think at that point, Watanabe knew his market. He knew what would sell. And what, in fact, sold was these nostalgic, emotionally charged images of old Japan. So I'm going to zoom in on this one so you can see how beautifully printed it is. And again, if you can see, there's this subtle blue that's printed on the rooftop, as well as in this area that's coming in, that sort of the night spilling onto the blue. I mean, of the white of the snow on the roof, and that is not as noticeable on this impression in the Narazaki book. Now, granted, it's printed, as I pointed out, and you lose some subtleties in the printing. But I also think, because this is slightly later, and this is the first state, this is what you should expect with a first state. and this being pre-war, you get that. Actually, I see it more here than in the book, but that might also mean that the book just doesn't really do a good job at capturing those effects. Now, before we wrap up, I want to point out, I always like to point out references on the prints we discuss. And this is an exceptional reference for people who may not want to invest in collecting the prints themselves, but want a wonderful large coffee table book with large images. I mean, the size of this print, or the size of the image of this print, is in fact life size or maybe slightly larger. No, it's life size. So that's kind of fascinating to see, the life size version in a book. It's quite rare. So this book is exceptional if you want to have as close to the real thing without paying those kind of prices. This is a great book, and it's a hardcover book. It comes in a clamshell box. That's the slipcase, and then there's a larger box that encloses everything. And for something a little bit less expensive, but more useful for a collector, this is the Hasui Catalog Raisonné that illustrates not the complete body of work, but I'd say about 95% of it. So this is as complete as they've gotten. And it's a 2-volume set. One volume shows all of the prints in terms of the color. They're all in color, but they're not photographed this large. Some of them are full page, but most of them by and large are smaller than even these images. So that's something, that you should be aware about. But this presents all of the prints with English titles, dates, so it's very useful. There is a conversation in the other book on the seals and other things. So, this is a must for a Hasui collector. Everyone should have that book. And I, in fact, have both books in my bookstore if you're interested. So I'm going to sort of back up so you can see the table, all the goodies we discussed today. And I've said this before, but for those of you who have not been to my site and have not seen my current exhibition of summer acquisitions, where these 2 prints are displayed and being offered for sale, as well as others, I encourage you to have a look. There's some exceptional pieces. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining me on this installment of Woodblock Wednesday. I have started the series back up. I took a bit of a break, actually 6 months, but I've started the series once again, and so I encourage all of you to follow me on YouTube, where all of these videos will be posted eventually. They're all archived there, but they're also on my website. And I think my website's a bit easier to navigate. So if you go to collectingjapaneseprints.com and go to Woodblock Wednesday, you'll see all the videos that I've produced. I have over 100 episodes on all kinds of Japanese prints and paintings. So that'll keep you busy. If there's a day where it's storming outside and you want to, watch a bunch of videos with a person like me discussing prints and paintings, well, there you go. So I want to thank all of you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Woodblock Wednesday. Until then, thanks.